I was just 19 when I first moved to the United States. My father died when I was still a baby, and my mom passed away from cancer just a few days before my 18th birthday. I stayed with my sister for a while, who was married with kids by that time, but it wasn't long before I started dreaming of a life away from Guatemala. I started my application not long after and pulled a few strings with an old friend of my father's to land a sponsor and a job up in Texas. Then, about 18 months later, I arrived in the city of Laredo. The U.S. was new and big and exciting, and although the work was hard and my pay wasn't great, I was happy. My abuela always used to say, "Al falta de pan, tortilla." When you don't have bread, you make do with tortillas, and that's exactly what I was doing. So I worked my crappy job and slept in a crappy shared apartment, having faith that things would improve over time. They did, but as per a favored saying of mine, it's always darkest before the dawn. And just when it seemed like things were going okay, there was a fire at the apartment building that I was staying in. We woke up to someone pounding on our door, and when we all ran outside, one half of the building was engulfed in flames. I think some people actually died that night. It was awful. So even though I was doomed to live in my car for the foreseeable future, it was kind of, by the grace of God go I kind of situation. So that was me, living in my car, pressing tortillas in this late-night cantina, saving every little penny that I could towards a plan that I hadn't even thought of yet. There were a lot of desperate people in Laredo around that time, and more of them turned to crime to help get ahead. I got more than one offer to get involved in something I really shouldn't have, and thankfully, God gave me the strength and the wisdom to stay on the straight and narrow. Some of the offers make me chuckle to think about these days. I just can't picture my skinny self slinging drugs or driving hookers around. I would have been eaten alive after 5 minutes of being out there. But other things I've gotten into don't make me laugh so much at all. One night, I was on break from my cantina shift, so I walked down to this corner store to pick up some Coke and maybe some cigarettes. Then instead of walking straight back to the cantina, I leaned up against a wall outside of the store, then lit up a smoke while I drank my Coke. I was just minding my own business, lost in my thoughts, when I suddenly heard a voice saying, "You work too hard, son." He said it in Spanish, but he had this fatherly tone about him, and when I looked around, I saw this older vaquero-looking guy walking up to me. I say vaquero, like a cowboy, but he dressed rich. Nice boots, nice hat, big shiny belt buckle, you know the kind. I told him something like, "Just trying to get by, Tio," thinking that he was going to move on after a passing comment. But he didn't. He walks right up to me and says, in Spanish, "It's not like everybody used to walk their dogs with sausages, right?" I think even some Chapinas won't understand what this means, so let me explain. In Guatemala, we say something which basically means when times were better and people were richer. Prosperous people can afford to feed their dogs delicious meat like chorizo or longanizas, so it's a saying which refers to that kind of period. The thing is, it's a very Guatemalan phrase, and the guy's accent was very obviously Mexicano, so you can imagine my confusion. I asked him, "Tu es Chapin?" And Chapin being slang for Guatemalan people, but he just laughed, shook his head, and told me, "I've been all over." That made sense, but what didn't was how he knew I was from Guatemala. I asked him how he knew where I was from, and he told me that it was his job to know things about people. According to him, this job paid very well, and if I was willing to give something up, I could make a lot of money too. Now, right away, I recognized that same slimy tone of someone who wants me to do something illegal for them. So I was gearing up to tell him thanks, but no thanks. But he must have read it in my body language or something, because he started trying to reassure me. He told me yes, what he was proposing was illegal, but that it wasn't immoral. I wasn't going to be driving addictive poison across the border or helping young women get into dangerous, life-destroying situations. It was nothing that was going to get me deported. I wouldn't be able to work for at least 6 to 8 weeks after whatever it was that he was proposing, but all my expenses would be paid for during this period, and I'd walk away with $4,000 cash. $4,000 was more than half my salary at that time, and way more than any of the pimps or dealers were offering. Then, with the promise of the work not being immoral, I'll admit that he had my attention. He went on to explain that in the United States, the trick to making money outside of the law was to stay away from vice, and in drugs and prostitution to work with the gringos, not without them or against them, and the wealthier those gringos were, the better. I figured that he was talking about some kind of financial crime, as he kept insisting that no one got hurt and that he worked with the best people around, his words. I guess that he kept me in the dark to keep me curious, something he'd practiced many times over probably, but it worked. And in the end, I asked him what I had to do to get my hands on that kind of money for just a few weeks' work. But then, instead of telling me straight up, the rich vaquero launched into a whole bunch of questions about my health. He asked me if I have diabetes, any heart problems, if I'm on medication, all this medical-related stuff that didn't really make sense to me at first. I figured whatever it was, I had to be fit and healthy for it, and my God, was I right about that. I wasn't being offered $4,000 for my labor. I was being offered it in exchange for one of my kidneys. And when he first said it, I thought that I must have misheard him, or that he was using some kind of slang term that I wasn't familiar with. He mistook my confusion for shock, and once again he went into this what sounded like a well-rehearsed method of trying to convince me. He told me that a fit young man like me could survive on one kidney, and that with enough time, it might even grow back. I might have been young, broke, and fairly naive, but I wasn't stupid. I knew major organs didn't just grow back, at least I was pretty sure they didn't. I wanted to tell the guy to stick his offer where the sun don't shine, as it was just about the most insane thing that I'd ever heard. But something told me that being rude to such a man wouldn't be a very wise move at all. I told him I'd think about it, and he gave me a card with nothing but a phone number written on it. I didn't call the number, and I knew better than to go saying anything about it because I'm from a place where people talk themselves into their graves sometimes. But I'm also from a place where people cash money into the graves too. So I kept my mouth shut and told myself that with hard work, prosperity would come eventually. Quick fixes are a rare thing in life, and you never fix long-term problems with short-term solutions. I never heard about anyone accepting any offers to sell their organs, but if a man felt comfortable and confident enough to approach migrant workers in the street, there must have been someone out there accepting these offers. I understand the wall of silence involved in something like organ trafficking, but you'd think you'd meet one or two people who actually did it, right? But I never did, and I think I figured out why. Say you went off with a stranger, and they took you to some back alley doctor and they gas you out under the impression that you're only losing one of your two kidneys. Who's to stop them from taking more, or from taking everything? You'd have to be crazy to agree to something like that. Crazy or truly desperate, and that's what scares me. I know that there are people out there so desperate they'll sell their organs. I was almost one of those people myself. I love this country, and I love the people more. But for many migrants like me, the road is long, hard, and some people never make it to the end. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.